He was just a quiet single dad working the grill at a small-town diner, until a group of young soldiers mocked his scars, and a decorated female general recognized the tattoo beneath his sleeve. The entire diner froze. And what happened next? No one saw coming. If you believe in quiet strength, second chances, and the power of kindness, you're in the right place. Take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Moment Story, so you never miss another tale that might just restore your faith in humanity. Now, let's begin. The bell above the door chimed softly, the kind of sound you barely noticed unless you were really listening. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds at Bray's Diner, casting soft golden lines across the red leather booths and checkered tile floor. The smell of brewed coffee, fresh biscuits, and sizzling bacon wrapped the room like a comforting blanket, the kind only small-town America could knit. Daniel Bray moved behind the counter with quiet precision, his long-sleeved green shirt slightly rolled at the wrist, revealing just the edge of a scar peeking from beneath the cuff. He wiped the countertop with slow, practiced motions. There was a calm about him, not the kind that comes from relaxation, but the kind that's earned after weathering storms most people never see. He looked like a man who had lived 10 lives and said nothing about any of them. At 38, Daniel's once military frame had softened just enough to make him approachable, though his posture still whispered discipline. His hair was long now, falling near his shoulders, streaked with just enough gray to make strangers wonder what he'd seen. His hazel eyes carried the weight of stories untold, steady, warm, and tired. At the far end of the diner, a few regulars nursed their coffees and exchanged pleasantries about football, grandchildren, and garden pests. The diner was more than a place to eat. It was a place to feel human. Daniel made sure of that. From the kitchen, a tiny voice called out, "Daddy!" The syrup exploded again. Daniel smiled softly. "Third time this week," he muttered to himself, and disappeared briefly through the swinging door. When he returned, a 10-year-old girl in a school backpack trailed behind him, holding a bottle of syrup, like it was a science experiment gone wrong. "Say good morning, Bella," he said. "Good morning, everyone." Bella beamed, waving. The entire diner echoed back in chorus. Morning, Bella. She was the light in Daniel's life, the only reason he kept going after the war, after the scars, after the fire that took more than just his skin. She sat at the corner booth, munching on a pancake bigger than her face. Daniel's eyes lingered on her for a second longer than necessary, the way a man looks when he knows he's living for someone else now. Then the bell rang again. The door swung open with the kind of force that announced trouble before it even walked in. 3 young soldiers in fatigues, loud and too confident for their own good, marched in laughing. One of them, the tallest, with a buzz cut and a name tag that read, Tyler, shouted across the room, "Smells like breakfast and retirement home in here." The other 2 laughed as they plopped into a booth and called for coffee. Daniel simply nodded, grabbing 3 mugs and pouring without saying a word. As he placed the cups down, Tyler squinted up at him. "Hey, aren't you the guy who used to be a soldier or something?" Daniel gave a polite half-smile. "Used to be a lot of things." "Yeah," another one said, chuckling. "What were you cafeteria staff on base KP duty, champion?" Daniel didn't answer. He just turned back toward the counter. His hand reached for the cloth, his movement smooth, unbothered. "Guess he burned out literally," Tyler joked, gesturing at Daniel's arm as his sleeve slid slightly while he reached for the sugar jar. A long scar, angry and raised, crawled from wrist to bicep. For a moment, the diner's warmth chilled. One of the old-timers at the bar shifted in his seat. Daniel said nothing. He finished wiping the spot, adjusted his sleeve, and moved on, quiet dignity clinging to every step. The mocking continued. Tyler mimed a limp. Bet he pulled a muscle lifting trays of mashed potatoes." The other two roared with laughter. Then the diner door opened again. The room went still. Framed by the morning sun stood a woman in a deep blue army dress, uniform, ribbons, pins, insignias gleaming. Her short hair was neat, tucked behind her ears. Her face, strong, intelligent, unreadable, scanned the diner like a field commander entering hostile territory. Tessa Donovan, Major General, decorated, feared, respected. The laughter died in the soldiers' throats. Even Bella Mid-Syrup Bite stared. Daniel looked up. His face changed. Just a little. He nodded toward the booth by the window. "Morning, ma'am. You want coffee?" She blinked. "Yes." "Black." "No sugar." He tilted his head, amused. "I figured." She arched a brow. "How?" Daniel poured and brought it over. As he placed the mug down, his voice lowered just enough for her to hear. "Only frontline officers drink it like that, especially ones who've spent time where the nights are longer than the days." Tessa narrowed her eyes. "That wasn't something you guessed. That was something you knew." "You served?" she asked cautiously. Daniel didn't answer directly. He turned to fetch syrup for another table. His sleeve dipped again. That's when she saw it. Just beneath the edge of fabric, a familiar ink pattern. A battlefield cross. Boots, rifle, helmet, and the faint outline of an airborne tab. Her breath caught. Her hand trembled slightly around the ceramic cup. Her mind shot back to a night she'd buried for 15 years. Kandahar, 2008. Flames. Screams. The smell of fuel. She had been bleeding out. A soldier, faceless, nameless, had pulled her from the wreckage. She remembered nothing but pain and heat, and the tattoo glowing in the firelight. This was him. It had to be. But why was he here, in a small-town diner, wiping counters and serving pancakes? Tessa's coffee sat untouched. And suddenly, she wasn't Major General Donovan anymore. She was just a woman staring at a ghost she thought she'd never see again. The coffee sat untouched. Major General Tessa Donovan stared across the diner, her fingertips resting on the mug, her eyes locked on the man behind the counter. The man who looked like a humble server, sleeves rolled down, wiping spills, with a calm so practiced it almost seemed rehearsed. And yet the moment she caught the glimpse of the tattoo under his cuff, that tattoo, everything around her seemed to blur. Boots, rifle, helmet, battlefield cross. Her mind buzzed with memories too vivid to be called memories. They were flashes, fragments. Kandahar 2008. Flames rising like devils from the earth. The weight of her own body crumpling against the twisted metal of a burning Humvee. The hiss of burning diesel. And arms, strong, scarred, and searing hot, lifting her from the wreckage and dragging her through the fire. That tattoo had been the last thing she saw before she blacked out. Now it was here, in front of her, in a diner with checkered floors and ketchup bottles. Tessa sat frozen, unsure whether she was hallucinating or dreaming. She didn't realize the soldiers who had been laughing moments before had gone quiet. Even they sensed something had shifted. Daniel Bray moved like nothing was unusual. He returned behind the counter, reached for the coffee pot, and topped off the old-timers' mugs with that same polite, unassuming nod he gave everyone. It was almost infuriating how still he was, how normal. She stood up. Her chair scraped the floor, drawing a soft creak across the tile. Daniel looked up, unfazed. "You remember every battlefield you've ever been on?" she said. Voice calm, steady. But some faces blur with time, except for one. Daniel didn't flinch. He just watched her eyes, unreadable. "The man who carried me out of a burning transport truck," she continued, taking a cautious step forward. The man, they said, never made it out. One of the younger soldiers still at their table turned toward her, confused. "The tall one?" Tyler started to whisper something, but the silence in the diner swallowed his voice. Tessa stopped a few feet from Daniel, her breath shallow. You knew the fire was rigged to blow a second time. You still went in. I remember, her voice caught. I remember seeing that tattoo. Daniel glanced down at his sleeve, then back at her. No denial, no surprise, just a gentle, measured nod. "Ma'am," he said, "your coffee's getting cold." That answer did something to her. Tessa's chest rose with something between disbelief and awe. She tried to speak but found no words. Instead, she just looked at him, really looked at him. The hair was longer now, beard faintly graying at the edges. But those eyes were the same. Wounded, wise, and weary. "You're Ghost Hawks," she whispered. "Delta. Task Force Kandahar." Daniel slowly reached over to wipe a small spill on the counter, revealing more of his arm. The ink was old, faded, but unmistakable. Below the cross, a barely visible phrase curled around the wrist in thin, scorched script. "He who saves one life saves the world entire." Tessa's throat tightened. No one outside Delta would know that motto. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't official. It was whispered in bunkers, etched into walls, and passed like folklore between men who walked where maps gave up. She sat back down without thinking. The strength that once stood behind podiums and barked commands at generals now melted into a stunned hush. She reached for her coffee hand, trembling. Daniel moved slowly to refill it just like before. As if this were just another Tuesday morning. "How long?" she finally asked. "How long have you been here?" "Since Bella was 4, he said. "She needed somewhere stable." "So did I." "Bella." "My daughter." Something softened in Tessa's face. "You have a daughter, 10 years old, bright as the morning sun and twice as stubborn." He said it with a smile, the kind of smile that only a single father, the real kind, could wear, quietly proud, quietly afraid. "But why this?" she asked. "Why this diner, this town? Why hide?" Daniel leaned forward, resting his arms on the counter. For a moment, she saw the fatigue in him, not physical, but spiritual. "Because hiding and healing can look the same if you're lucky," he said. "Out there, I saved lives. In here, I try to live one." Tessa swallowed hard. "You could have been a commander, a teacher, a voice for veterans. Why let everyone think you're just a guy who pours coffee?" He met her eyes, unwavering. "Because there's a difference between needing recognition and needing peace. I chose peace." Behind them, Bella's laugh rang out from the kitchen. She was humming some pop song and mispronouncing every word. It made Daniel smile again, softer this time. Tessa looked toward the girl's voice, then back at Daniel. "I thought you died," she said quietly. "I almost did. I told them you pulled me out, that you saved me. I didn't need them to know." She blinked. Why, Daniel exhaled slowly. Because the people who need to know always find out eventually. The words landed like scripture. The young soldiers across the diner looked down at their plates, no longer smug or rowdy. Tyler especially looked rattled, piecing together the man they had mocked with the legend, now sitting across from a general. Silence filled the diner again. But it wasn't awkward anymore. It was sacred. Daniel poured one last refill into Tessa's cup and said gently, "You don't owe me anything, General." She shook her head. "But I do," she whispered. "My life, my career, my breath. You gave me that." Daniel paused, then nodded once, firm but kind. "Then use it well." For a long, ordinary second, the diner breathed, as one organism, the clatter of silverware, the low hum of a radio playing an old country tune, the soft murmur of conversation. Then Tyler laughed, a high, brittle sound that broke the fragile calm. "You gonna tell us war stories, old man?" he shouted louder than he needed to. "Show us your medals, Grandpa." Or is that a fashion statement? He jabbed a thumb toward Daniel's forearm where a sleeve met skin. Daniel kept wiping. He kept his mouth shut. That was his pattern. Let the noise pass. Let the insult skid off the surface. Let the peace of the diner hold. But the youngest soldier, a kid with fresh chevrons and fresh bravado, pushed his chair back and swaggered to the counter. "Hey man, you really a vet?" he asked, leaning so close that Daniel could smell the cheap cologne and sweat of a man untested by hardship. "I mean, who are you hiding from under that sleeve? Scars don't lie unless you bought 'em." The word hide landed like a small stone, ricocheting through the air between them and landing in Bella's lap. She looked up puzzled, and Daniel's jaw tightened, but his hand stayed steady. He folded a napkin with a calm that had been trained into him long ago. Peace, he reminded himself. Peace for Bella. Tyler laughed and leaned in, eyes bright with malice. "Come on, show us. It's not like you're in some secret ops anymore. You're just a cook, a barista for the brave." The other two snickered, egging him on. Someone near the jukebox snorted. A couple of truckers at the far booth exchanged a look. Their faces registered annoyance, but not yet intervention. Mockery in small towns often began as theater. People loved the drama. They rarely loved the consequences. Daniel moved to the sugar canister. The cloth slipped a fraction. The sleeve of his shirt rode up. Tyler's grin widened. Aha. Look at that. There it was, the long, pale scar like a river on burned earth. And beneath it, the ink, not bright, not new, but stubbornly present. The battlefield cross, stylized helmet perched on inverted rifle combat boot, a tiny airborne tab, curling like a banner. The room sank an inch. For Daniel, the moment the sleeve revealed the mark felt like time folding over itself. He had lived with that image seared into him for years in hospital mirrors, in the glass of a car window at 3 a.m., when nightmares wound him awake. Now strangers' laughter collided with the history that tattoo held. Tyler whistled the sound cheap. That's some dramatic ink. You get that at the tattoo parlor next to the bowling alley. Laughter came strained from his table. But there was an edge. The men who mocked now sounded unsure, like boys trying on cruelty for size. Tessa's hand tightened around her mug. Her knuckles went white. The sight of the tattoo tugged a new thread of memory into the room's fabric. Not just her memory, but the memory of others who had been in shadows that night. The old-timer at the bar, a man with more medals on his chest than money in his pocket, suddenly had a different look, like someone who had recognized a tune from another life. Tyler, sensing his audience wobble, pushed harder. What unit's that supposed to be, Ghost Hawks? Sounds like a comic book. That name was a match tossed onto dry kindling. For the men who had served for those who had lost names, meant more than gossip. For the young soldiers, it meant nothing until someone older in the room muttered half to himself, "Ghost Hawks." Kandahar. Silence rippled outward like a stone dropped into still water. Conversations at other booths dissolved. The truckers straightened. The woman eating pie paused with a fork halfway to her mouth. Even the radio seemed to lower its voice. Daniel's face was a study in stillness. A square jaw controlled breathing eyes that took everything in and revealed nothing. He could have told them about the night. He could have risen chest bare and recited headlines from a life written in flame and blood. But there was a different skill in restraint, an older, quieter command. He would not make of his past a spectacle. Tyler's bravado faltered under that calm. He had expected a different payoff, a scramble for attention, a fight, at least a laugh. Instead, he found himself spotlighted in a room where symbols carried real weight. "Hey man," Tyler said softer now. "We didn't mean." One of the other young soldiers, the one who had been the loudest, reached out and grabbed the sleeve, trying to pull it back down. His fingers brushed the scar and hesitated, as if contact were sacrilege. The diner felt smaller. Eyes moved, measuring, remembering. A woman in her 70s dabbed her eyes with a napkin and then straightened her back in a way that suggested more than sympathy. An old man at the counter, his hair thin and his jacket patched, pushed himself up and walked over leaning on a cane. He wore a faded baseball cap and a jacket that still carried an embroidered emblem of a unit long disbanded. He stopped in front of Daniel and raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. The salute was small, but the meaning hung large in the air. "Son," the old man said, his voice cracked, but steady. "We don't make sport of what others gave." He nodded at Daniel's arm. "Not here." Tyler's face went a shade paler. He hadn't expected the history in that room to be standing now, to have a throat to speak with and a past to defend. The laughter died like embers under rain. Bella watched all of it with the curious concentration of a child, learning new rules for the world. She saw the crude joke, the reveal the old man, the hush. She saw her father stand nearly as still as a lighthouse. And then she reached out and took his hand, under the counter, small fingers, gripping with a faith that needed no explanation. Daniel felt the warmth, and it steadied him. He turned slightly, offering Bella the faintest smile, the kind that said everything she needed to know. "I will not let this be a thing for them to learn cruelty from." Tessa stood, every muscle taut. The general's presence shivered through the air like a dropped curtain. She stepped forward the way someone approaches a wound, careful, respectful, and not knowing whether her intrusion was a bomb or a rupture. "You made a choice," once she said to Tyler, but her eyes were on Daniel. A choice some of us never had the chance to name. Her voice was low, but it carried. "You do not deserve laughter." Tyler swallowed. He looked at his boots, then at the tattoo, then at the old man's salute. Somewhere inside the boy, something shifted, a seed of shame, thin but real. He forced a nod and muttered, "Sorry." It was said without conviction, but it was a start. The room exhaled relief and unease, mingling like steam. The mockery had been interrupted not simply by reprimand, but by the weight of memory and the quiet authority of people who understood that some jokes were too expensive to make. Daniel's hands returned to the cloth. He wiped the counter with the same slow, precise motion he always used. The scar and the ink remained warm and present. But the atmosphere of the diner had changed from a place of ordinary routines to a place where stories had teeth and people were forced to bite. Outside, a car horn sounded. Inside, Bella giggled at something the cook in the kitchen had said, as if nothing had happened at all. That single unguarded laugh was like sunlight breaking through clouds. It reminded everyone why battles were fought and why peace was sometimes the truest reward. And though the room had quieted, the air carried an undercurrent, a suggestion that the small scene at Bray's diner was not the end of this story. Old ghosts had found a face in flesh. Some pasts, it seemed, were patient enough to wait until someone finally recognized them. The diner had returned to a hushed stillness, not from fear, but from reverence. The tattoo had spoken. The scar had told a story. But it wasn't until Tessa Donovan leaned back into her booth, staring into the black coffee she hadn't touched, that the story truly began to bleed through the walls of memory. She wasn't in Bray's diner anymore. She was back there. Kandahar. March 2008. Dust stung her eyes as the sun dipped below the horizon. The heat of the day hadn't gone. It had buried itself into the very metal of the convoy trucks, turning each vehicle into a slow-cooked coffin. They were on routine transport. At least that's what the orders said. But in war, routine didn't exist. Ambushes didn't care about protocol. And the explosion came fast, too fast, for protocol, too fast for prayer. Tessa remembered the flash before the sound. The world bent inward deafening and bright. She'd been thrown sideways, her helmet cracking against the steel wall. She barely registered the pain before the flames followed. They didn't spread, they devoured. The Humvee's right side was already gone. And then came the screaming. 3 voices. Then 2. Then silence. She tried to crawl, but her leg was pinned. Metal. Blood. Her own someone else's didn't matter. She'd never known fear like that. Not even in ranger school. Not even in her first firefight. This was different. This was the kind of fear that whispered, "You're going to die alone, and no one will find your bones." And then, through the black smoke and the orange glow, he appeared. Not with fanfare, not with shouts or barking orders. He moved like the night itself had sent him precise, silent, terrifying in his purpose. She couldn't see his face. His gas mask was fogged the firelight, reflecting in the lenses like glowing eyes. But she saw the tattoo. Through the torn sleeve of his combat shirt, just above the blackened edge of a glove, the battlefield cross burned into her vision. She remembered that flash more clearly than the explosion. Then his hands were under her, lifting, dragging, ignoring her screams, ignoring the shrapnel biting his back, ignoring the incoming secondary blasts as ammunition inside the truck cooked off. They moved through fire like shadows through fog. He didn't stop. Not even when the second blast went off behind them, sending debris whistling past like knives. He shielded her body with his own. And then he was gone. She woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Ramstein, burned, disoriented, alive. They told her a Delta operator had pulled her out. No name, no record. The mission had been classified, redacted, shredded, and burned. The ghost hawks, they whispered. Black team, off books, no command chain, no return address. Tessa had spent 15 years wondering if he was real. Now he was serving coffee. Back in the present, the mug in her hand had gone cold, but her fingers were warm. They trembled as she set it down. Across the counter, Daniel wiped down a plate without looking up. "You remember it," she said softly. "I try not to," he replied, equally quiet. "But you do." Daniel finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from carrying years that never got lighter. "I remember every sound," he said, "every scream, every footstep, the heat, the smell of burning tires, the way the sand melted into glass." Tessa swallowed hard. "You disappeared that night. Vanished. I was supposed to." He didn't blink. "We weren't meant to be known. Then why did you save me?" There it was, the question that had haunted her for a decade and a half. Why risk your life, your mission, your anonymity? For me, Daniel placed the plate on the rack, dried his hands with a cloth. Then he spoke not loudly, but with a weight that made the air lean in to listen. Because no mission is worth leaving someone behind. Tessa lowered her gaze. "They told me you died. I carried that guilt for years." "You don't owe me guilt," Daniel said. "You owe yourself peace." Her breath caught. The man before her wasn't looking for recognition. He wasn't trying to relive glory or reclaim forgotten medals. He was just a father, a survivor, a man who had built his peace one pancake at a time. But the scars she started are a reminder, he finished, that I made it back, that I had something worth coming home to. Her eyes glistened. "You lost your identity, your rank, your future, and you still saved mine." He shook his head. "I didn't lose anything. I traded it for something better." Tessa tilted her head. "And what's that?" Daniel glanced toward the back where Bella was helping the cook arrange jelly packets into a rainbow. She was laughing again. "Not a care in the world, her," he said simply. Tessa turned to look. For a moment, she didn't see a general. She saw a woman saved by a ghost staring at the reason that ghost had stayed gone. I used to think the battlefield was where the real wars were fought, she whispered. Daniel leaned against the counter. Sometimes the real fight is learning how to live when the war's over. That silence returned not awkward, but earned. The kind of silence that only exists between people who survived something no one else understood. From the other side of the diner, one of the young soldiers stood up unsure. His eyes flicked between Tessa and Daniel, finally recognizing that something sacred had unfolded in front of him, and he had tried to mock it. Daniel caught the glance but didn't hold it. The kid wasn't ready yet, but maybe in time he would be. Later that afternoon, the diner cleared out slowly. Regulars drifted back to their pickup trucks and garden centers, pretending not to have witnessed something profound. That was the way small towns handled reverence quietly, without intrusion. Tessa stood at the counter, unsure of her next words. She reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She slid it across to Daniel. He didn't open it. "It's not an award," she said. "Not a decoration." Daniel gave her a knowing look. "Then what is it?" Thank you," she replied, from someone who's finally ready to say it. He opened the cloth slowly. Inside was a patch, Ghost Hawk's insignia black thread on dark gray canvas. Beneath it, a single dog tag. Not his, not hers, but someone's. Tessa stepped back. "Maybe someday you'll tell Bella what it means," she said. "Or maybe not. Either way, it deserves to be with you." Daniel nodded. Emotion caught somewhere between his chest and throat. And then, without a word more, she walked to the door, not as a general, but as a woman who had carried 15 years of debt, now finally repaid. As she pushed the door open, sunlight poured in behind her, casting Daniel in warm silhouette. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man seen. The bell above the diner door jingled softly behind her, but Tessa Donovan didn't look back. Daniel stood where she left him behind the counter, hands still resting near the folded cloth that held the Ghost Hawk's insignia and dog tag. The room was empty now, save for the fading scent of coffee and the long shadow stretching across the tiles as the sun began its slow descent behind the hills of Port Haven. He stared at the patch for a long moment before folding the cloth shut again. It wasn't about what it symbolized. It was about who still remembered, and that he hadn't expected. The next morning came quietly. The usuals trickled into Bray's diner, a widowed librarian with arthritis in her knees, 2 retired factory workers who argued over the merits of tomato gravy, and a tired school bus driver named Bonnie, who ordered the same cinnamon toast every morning. Daniel moved among them with his usual grace. Coffee poured. Eggs sizzled. The hum of a calm life returned as if the storm of the previous day had passed, but it hadn't. Not really. At exactly 7:46 a.m., the bell above the door rang again. Tessa Donovan stood there, but this time she wore civilian clothes. No brass, no ribbons, just jeans, boots, and a button-down blouse tucked neatly into a belt with a faint insignia stitched at the loop. Army still, but subtly so. She looked younger this way, or perhaps just lighter. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "Morning." "Is the seat by the window still the best one?" she asked. He motioned toward it. She sat, set her phone down beside her, and waited. Daniel brought over a mug of black coffee without asking. "You remember," she said. "You don't forget things like that." A moment passed. Then quietly she said, "I need to ask you something. Something I've asked a dozen times to people with stars on their shoulders and clearance above mine." Daniel leaned against the counter, arms folded. Tessa's voice dropped. "What's your real name?" He looked at her for a long beat. There was no alarm in his eyes, no surprise. But there was distance and weight. I mean, she continued, "Not your name on the lease or the mailbox. The name you wore when you saved me." Daniel exhaled. That name died the night you lived. Her breath caught in her throat. He hadn't said it cruelly. He hadn't said it with drama. Just as fact. Like a gravestone, polished smooth over time. I used to need that name, he said. To lead men. To take orders. To be something. But after Kandahar, after the file burned and the records vanished, I realized the only name I needed was Dad. He didn't say it for pity. He said it for truth. Tessa blinked. And you never told anyone, Daniel smiled faintly. That's the thing about ghosts. They don't introduce themselves. For a moment, she looked like she might press further. But then Bella came bounding in from the kitchen, a bright pink backpack bouncing on her shoulders, her curly hair tied up in a crooked ponytail. Daddy, she called. I packed my lunch by myself today. I put the cold stuff on the bottom so it stays cold longer. Like you taught me. Daniel grinned. Genius. She ran over, squeezed his waist, and looked at Tessa. Hi, Bella chirped. You came back? I did, Tessa said, smiling. You must be Bella. Bella nodded proudly. That's me. My daddy makes the best pancakes in the world. And he's really good at fixing things, even sad people. Tessa's eyes softened. I can see that. Then Bella leaned in, squinting. Are you my dad's friend? Tessa hesitated, then said carefully, I think your dad saved my life once. Bella's face lit up. He does that. He's like a quiet superhero, with a spatula. Daniel chuckled, tousling his daughter's hair. Bella looked at both of them, then leaned in toward Tessa again. Do you know my daddy's secret name? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Bella, she shrugged. You said every superhero has a name they don't tell people. Like Batman. Tessa smiled gently. I think I do know it, but I also think he likes being called Dad more. Bella beamed. Me too. She kissed her father on the cheek and skipped back toward the kitchen. When she was gone, Daniel's smile faded into a reflective stillness. Tessa spoke again, her voice lower now. You were more than just a ghost hawk, weren't you? Daniel said nothing. You were one of the originals, she continued. I remember the way you moved that night, the silence, the precision. You weren't just sent in, you designed the mission. Still, he said nothing, but his eyes confirmed it. Why give it all up, she whispered. Men with less experience are writing books, running defense firms, lecturing at West Point. Daniel glanced toward the kitchen where Bella's laughter echoed, because none of those things would have given me her. Tessa swallowed hard. You chose the quiet path. I chose the one that lets me sleep at night. She paused, then almost in disbelief said, You gave your name to the fire and walked out with nothing but a child and a conscience. Daniel's gaze never wavered. And I'd do it again. Tessa leaned back, studying him with the eyes of a soldier who had seen commanders bluff and generals break. But Daniel Bray, or whatever his name once was carved from something different. She finally said, They still talk about you, you know. In circles no one admits exist. The one who pulled a major through fire, then vanished, left no trace but a tattoo. Daniel didn't respond. Some call you a myth. He raised a brow, then let them sleep easy. Myths don't pay rent. Tessa laughed a real warm laugh that surprised even her. Then her voice grew tender. Thank you, for not just saving me, but for showing me that walking away doesn't mean giving up. It can mean giving to something greater. Daniel looked down at the cloth on the counter, the ghost hawk's patch folded neatly where he left it. Then back at her. No one needs to remember my name, he said, as long as they remember what matters. Outside, the American flag hanging from the post near the parking lot fluttered in the breeze. Inside, a general stood up and placed 2 crisp bills under her mug. But before she left, she turned to face him one last time. I don't need your name, she said. I already know who you are. And Daniel? Just nodded. Because sometimes the name you never speak is the one that speaks the loudest. The sun had slipped behind the hills of Port Haven, casting long shadows across the diner floor. A warm, amber glow filled Bray's diner, reflecting softly off the chrome fixtures and red leather booths. It was the kind of twilight that made everything feel slower, quieter, like the world was taking a breath. Daniel stood alone behind the counter, drying the last of the plates from the dinner rush. Bella had finished her homework and was curled up in the corner booth, dozing lightly with a book half open in her lap. The sight of her peaceful and small was the only medal he'd ever cared to keep. The bell above the door didn't ring. Instead, a familiar voice came from the shadows just outside. You ever regret it? He didn't look up. Tessa Donovan stepped through the doorway, now in uniform. Again, full dress blues the silver of her stars, catching the last light. Not the civilian warmth of yesterday. Tonight, she was all rank, all steel. Daniel placed the last plate on the shelf. Regret? What disappearing? Giving up everything. Walking away from a life people spend decades building toward. Daniel wiped his hands on a cloth, then leaned against the counter. I didn't walk away, he said. I walked to something else. Tessa stepped forward. You were listed as KIA. Your entire team was classified as mission compromised, presumed lost. No records, no graves, nothing but a few scorched reports and a line in the DoD's most restricted archive. Daniel's eyes were calm, steady. That's how it was meant to be. You never told anyone. I told the one person who mattered. He glanced toward Bella, still asleep in the booth. Tessa followed his gaze, and something softened in her expression, the rigid posture of a soldier briefly overtaken by the quiet ache of understanding. I've spent years trying to find out who saved me that night, she said. But they made sure your name vanished, burned the files, reassigned your unit. You became a ghost. And her voice faltered. I kept chasing a ghost because I couldn't accept that I lived, and the one who saved me didn't. Daniel looked away for a moment, as if the memory itself had returned uninvited. I did die, he said, in every way that mattered to the Army. I was burned half-conscious, evac under a name that wasn't mine. The hospital didn't know who I was, and the unit, what was left of it, had orders to vanish. Tessa stepped closer. You could have come back. You could have rebuilt, testified, written the truth. He gave a sad smile. Truth. The truth is the man who wore that uniform died in that fire. What crawled out? Just wanted quiet. I didn't need rank or revenge. I needed her to grow up without war in her eyes. He nodded toward Bella again. Tessa exhaled. The tension in her shoulders eased as she took a seat at the counter. You still have the mind of a commander, she said. I traded command for pancakes, he replied with a dry smile. Turns out people yell less. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall and Bella's soft breathing in the booth. Then Tessa reached into her pocket and placed a small velvet box on the counter. Daniel didn't touch it. You earned it, she said. I walked away from it. She opened it anyway. Inside was the silver star, polished, gleaming a medal reserved for gallantry in action. Its presence felt both heavy and undeserved in this humble space. I filed a formal request, Tessa said. Used every connection I had. Cited the Kandahar incident. Described the tattoo. The scar. Your actions. And the fact that I'm alive because of you. Daniel didn't blink. And the board approved it, she said, unanimously. I didn't even need to name you. He looked at the medal for a long time, then gently closed the box. I don't want it. Tessa frowned. Why? Because if I keep that, he said softly, I'll start remembering why I got it. And some memories aren't meant to live outside the fire. Tessa looked down, struggling with the injustice of it all. But your story isn't mine alone, he cut in. It belongs to the men who didn't make it out. The ones whose names never reached the walls. The ones whose families never got closure. She nodded slowly. I understand. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the counter, voice low. I've served in enough places where names mattered more than people. I won't let my daughter grow up thinking legacy means attention. She doesn't know, does she? Tessa asked. Who you really are. She knows I'm her father. That's enough. Tessa studied him, the lines of weathered skin, the old burns carefully hidden beneath his sleeves, the patience of a man who had seen death and chosen to become life. You think hiding honors their memory? No, he said. But peace does. They sat in silence again. Then Daniel spoke. You want to know the real reason I stayed off the grid? Tessa looked at him. It wasn't just about protecting Bella, he said. It was about proving to myself that I could be something without the war. That I could be gentle. The word felt foreign on his tongue, strange and yet perfectly fitting. And were you? She asked. He nodded. Eventually. Tessa looked toward the patch he still kept folded under the counter. Sometimes, she whispered, the greatest battlefield is the one where no one's shooting. Daniel smiled faintly. And the hardest thing to do is stay. Tessa stood, placing the box gently back into her coat. No matter what name they called you back. Then she said, you'll always be the man who stepped through fire and gave me a second chance, whether the world knows it or not. Daniel nodded once. Then use it well. As she turned to leave, Bella stirred and sat up, rubbing her eyes. Daddy, she mumbled. Daniel walked over and knelt beside her. Hey, sweet pea. You okay? I had a dream, she said. There was fire. But someone walked through it. He paused. Did they say anything? Bella nodded sleepily. They said, you're safe now. Daniel pulled her close, holding her in silence. Behind him, Tessa watched and finally understood. He wasn't just a veteran. He was a healer. And the scars on his arms, they weren't marks of pain. They were proof that he had walked through hell and came back not to tell the tale, but to build a quieter, better one. The morning after the truth was quietly revealed, Bray's diner opened to the smell of bacon and buttermilk pancakes, as it always did. But the atmosphere felt different. It wasn't louder or quieter, just more reverent. Like the walls themselves had started listening. Daniel moved behind the counter with his usual efficiency, apron tied, neat sleeves, rolled down hair loosely tied back. Bella sat at the corner booth, sketching stick figures on a napkin, one tall with a spatula, one small with a braid, and a third with shiny stars on her shoulders. When the bell above the door rang at 8:03 a.m., Daniel didn't look up. He simply wiped the counter. But Bella did, and she froze. 3 figures stood at the door, shifting awkwardly in place, like kids waiting outside the principal's office. They were in uniform, but not the easy, brash kind they wore days before. No sunglasses, no cocky swagger. They stood with their hats in their hands and shame in their eyes. Tyler, the tallest, the loudest, stepped forward first. Daniel looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. Bella's eyes darted from her father to the soldiers in back. She slid off the booth and walked quietly to the kitchen. She knew something serious was happening. Tyler cleared his throat. Sir, the word hung there, heavy, unnatural on his tongue, but necessary. Daniel tilted his head slightly. You're early for pancakes. Tyler's jaw clenched. We came to say something. The second soldier, a redhead with a nervous twitch, added. We didn't know. About Kandahar. About ghost talks. About you. Daniel said nothing. The third soldier, younger, barely out of high school, shuffled forward and pulled something from his jacket, a folded napkin. He laid it on the counter and opened it. Inside was a tarnished challenge coin. Worn. From the 82nd Airborne. Belonged to my uncle, he said softly. He was in Fallujah. Said you only give it to someone you'd go through fire for. Daniel's eyes flicked to the coin, then back to the young man. What's his name? Staff Sergeant Ethan Marks. Daniel nodded slowly. I knew him. A beat of stunned silence. Didn't know he had family in the 507th. The boy swallowed. He talked about someone who carried him when he couldn't walk. A guy with a quiet voice and a scar on his right arm. Daniel folded the napkin back around the coin and slid it toward the boy. You keep it. He'd want that. Tyler stepped forward again, his voice hoarse. Sir, I need to say it out loud. What we said to you. The way we laughed. He paused, chest rising with the weight of regret. It was wrong. Disrespectful. I was arrogant. I thought this diner was some nowhere place, and that you were just a guy in an apron. Daniel looked at him, gaze unwavering. Not cold, not angry, just present. And now he asked quietly. Tyler's voice broke. Now I know you're the kind of man I hope to become. The diner fell silent. Even Bella, peeking from the kitchen doorway, held her breath. Daniel stepped around the counter. He looked at Tyler, a young man in a world that measured worth by noise, learning that true power was quiet. Then he placed a steady hand on Tyler's shoulder. The important thing Daniel said was gentle is not that you were wrong. It's that you showed up to make it right. Tyler knotted his throat tight. Daniel added, shame fades. But what you choose after it, that's what lasts. The words hit deeper than any rebuke could have. Then Daniel turned to the youngest soldier, the one with the coin. You serve with your uncle's memory now. That's a privilege. Don't waste it trying to be loud. Be exact. The boy's eyes glistened. He nodded slowly. And you, Daniel said, turning to the redhead, the next time someone tells a story that sounds unbelievable, maybe ask why they're quiet about it. The man lowered his head. Yes, sir. Daniel let the silence hang for a moment, then nodded toward a table. You boys hungry? Tyler blinked. You're still serving us. Daniel cracked a smile. Everyone deserves a second chance, even if they haven't earned the hash browns yet. That broke the tension. The men laughed, awkward and grateful, and took their seats. As Daniel walked back behind the counter, Bella ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. Daddy, she whispered, those were the boys who were mean to you. I know, he replied. But you forgave them. He crouched to her level, brushing a curl from her face. Sometimes, the best way to teach someone they were wrong is to show them how right forgiveness can feel. Bella tilted her head. Even if they were really mean, Daniel nodded, especially then. She thought for a moment, then smiled and darted off toward the soldiers with her napkin sketch. Do you want to see my drawing? She chirped. This is my daddy. He's a superhero. But shh, it's a secret. They leaned in to look, smiling sheepishly. Tyler glanced back at Daniel, eyes full of something new, respect, without fear. The rarest kind. Later that day, when the soldiers had gone and the lunch rush faded, Daniel stood by the window sipping coffee. Tessa returned just after 1, her uniform jacket slung over her shoulder. This time, no medals, no ceremony. Just a woman following a thread of something sacred. Heard you had visitors, she said. Daniel didn't turn around. Word travels fast. She joined him by the window. You could have ignored them. I could have, he said. But then, who would they learn from? She nodded, quiet admiration in her eyes. Any regrets? He shook his head. No, they didn't come for a fight. They came to change. That's rare. And when you see it, you answer it. Tessa looked at him, truly looked. You've changed more lives in this diner than most generals do in a war zone. Daniel gave a soft chuckle. I've flipped more pancakes than I've fired rounds. That counts for something, I guess. She placed her hand on the counter palm, flat, steady. You should know. The Army approved your reinstatement. Name cleared. Rank honored. Full benefits. You could walk back in tomorrow if you wanted. Daniel didn't react. Then he said simply, I already have everything I want. Tessa nodded, and this time she didn't argue. She understood. Some heroes didn't need medals. They needed mornings with a daughter, forgiveness from young men, and the quiet courage to live unseen. The following Saturday morning arrived like a soft sigh over Port Haven. The town was still rubbing sleep from its eyes as golden light spilled down Main Street, warming the sidewalk bricks and brushing the windows of Bray's diner. Inside, Bella was already wide awake and in charge. She stood on a stool behind the counter apron, too big hair tied into a lopsided ponytail, and a determined look on her face. In her hands was a notepad filled with crayon scribbles posing as orders, and beside her, Daniel watched with an amused smile and just a hint of pride. 3 chocolate chip pancakes, she said firmly with extra syrup and a smile on top. That's what Miss Connie always wants. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And how would you know that I listen? Daddy Bella grinned. You always say that's half the job. Daniel tousled her hair. You're not wrong. The diner felt lighter than it had in days. Not just because the apology had come and gone, but because something had shifted in Daniel and the town, and especially in Bella. She had seen something powerful in her father that day. Not just bravery, not just patience, but a kind of quiet wisdom the world rarely celebrates. She had seen a hero walk without armor, and still carry the room. At around 10 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed again. Tessa Donovan stepped in, not in uniform, not in business attire, but in a soft blue cardigan and jeans. She looked human, and a little uncertain. Bella spotted her first and lit up. Hi, General Lady Tessa laughed. Just Tessa today. She approached the counter, and Bella immediately offered her a seat on the spinning stool beside her own. You want pancakes? Bella asked. They make you happy. Science says so. Tessa glanced at Daniel, who nodded toward the griddle. I wouldn't say no to science, Tessa replied, settling onto the stool. As the smell of butter and cinnamon filled the space, Bella swung her legs and leaned in, studying the woman beside her. Are you really a soldier? She asked. I am, Tessa said. Did my daddy save you? Tessa hesitated, caught between truth and the weight of its delivery. Yes, she said finally. A long time ago. He saved my life. Bella's face glowed with pride. He does that. Has he told you about it? Bella shook her head. He doesn't talk about the war. He says the diner is his favorite mission now. Tessa glanced at Daniel, and he met her eyes for just a moment. No shame. No explanation. Just confirmation. Bella pointed to the faint outline of the tattoo just visible under her father's rolled sleeve. Does that mean something? She asked Tessa. Tessa nodded. It's called the Battlefield Cross. It's a symbol. It honors soldiers who didn't come home. Bella looked down at the floor for a moment. Did Daddy lose friends? Tessa's voice softened. Yes. Many. Bella was quiet, processing. Then slowly she reached out and touched the tattoo on her father's arm. Daniel looked down at her, her small hand the weight of her understanding, and the room stilled. What does it mean to you, Daddy? She asked. Daniel crouched beside her, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, but filled with memory. It means I remember the ones who didn't make it. It means I try to live a life that honors them by being kind, by helping people, by being your dad." Bella blinked, taking it in. Then she smiled. "That's a good kind of hero." Daniel kissed her forehead. "That's the only kind I ever wanted to be." Tessa looked away for a second, blinking fast. Later that day, the diner was full, not just with regulars, but with something intangible respect. People who had once seen Daniel as just a quiet man behind a counter now saw something more. They didn't ask questions. They didn't press. But they looked a little longer, spoke a little softer, and when they said thank you, it carried a different weight. At the corner booth, Bella had drawn a picture. She brought it over to Tessa, proudly holding it up. In the center was a tall man with a beard, a little girl holding his hand, and a diner in the background. Above them, she had drawn a giant sun with rays reaching down like golden fingers. "This is my daddy," Bella explained. "And that's me. And that's you over there." Tessa looked closely. In the corner of the drawing was a woman with short hair and a uniform holding a flag. "And what's the sun?" Tessa asked gently. Bella smiled. "That's my mom. I think she watches us." Daniel looked up, startled. It was the first time Bella had ever said that out loud. He swallowed hard. "You think so, sweetheart?" Bella nodded. "She gives me good dreams, ones where we're all together." Tessa's eyes shimmered. "Your mom must have been very brave," she said. Daniel whispered, "Braver than me." That night, after the last table was cleaned and the lights dimmed to a warm hum, Daniel and Bella walked home under a sky splashed with stars. She held his hand tightly, skipping every other step. "Daddy, can I get a tattoo one day?" He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She shrugged. "So I don't forget what matters." Daniel smiled, wide, soft, proud. "Well," he said, "as long as it means something worth remembering." Bella nodded, satisfied. They reached the front porch. Daniel unlocked the door, and as they stepped inside, Bella looked up at him. "Promise me something. Anything. When I grow up, you'll still be making pancakes." Daniel knelt eye level with her. "As long as you're still eating them." She giggled, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered, "Best mission ever." Daniel held her there in that perfect stillness, and felt something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Not just peace, but light, and not the kind that flickers in memory or burns in battle. The kind that shines from a 10-year-old girl with crayons in her pocket, forgiveness in her blood, and the belief that the quietest man in town was the biggest hero in the world. The letter came in a plain government envelope. No fanfare, no flags, just a white rectangle stamped with an official seal and a barcode. Daniel found it slipped beneath the front door of the diner one morning, wedged between the local newspaper and a coupon flyer for lawn chairs. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. The return address was a base he once knew like the back of his hand. Camp Overwatch, Delta Command HQ. Inside a single letter, neatly typed, and one sentence underlined in bold. "You are hereby invited to attend a private recognition ceremony for service rendered under Joint Task Force Ghost Hawks Kandahar 2008. No details, no RSVP link, just a date, a time, and a location: Port Haven Military Annex." Daniel folded the letter, tucked it into his back pocket, and returned to the grill like nothing had changed. But something had. The morning of the ceremony arrived quiet and overcast. Daniel wore his cleanest shirt, still a soft olive drab, and his usual boots. He hadn't worn a uniform in years, and he wasn't about to start again now. Bella walked beside him, holding his hand, her hair in 2 neat braids, and her favorite pink backpack bouncing with each step. "Where are we going, Daddy?" she asked. "Some people want to say thank you," he replied. "For what?" For something I did a long time ago. Bella tilted her head. You mean saving people? Daniel paused. Something like that. The Port Haven military annex wasn't much a red brick building that smelled of old paper and floor polish, its walls lined with framed photos of soldiers past. The kind of place where medals were handed out with too many speeches and not enough understanding. But this ceremony was different. There were only 5 people in the room. Tessa Donovan stood near the front, not in uniform, but in a dark navy suit. A quiet reverence wrapped around her like a second skin. Beside her stood a man Daniel hadn't seen in 15 years. Colonel Bruce Harlan, former Delta commander, now gray at the temples, but still sharp in the jaw. He stepped forward, saluted, and handed Daniel a box. No podium. No national anthem. Just silence and sincerity. Daniel opened the box. Inside lay the silver star, gleaming pristine, untouched. He stared at it for a long while, then closed the lid gently and looked up. I can't accept this. Harlan blinked. You earned it, son. I didn't do it to be remembered. Tessa stepped forward. That's exactly why you should be. Daniel shook his head. I've got something better. He turned and looked at Bella standing at the back of the room, holding a hand-drawn card in crayon. In big letters, it said, My daddy is a hero, but he still picks me up from school. He held up the medal box and handed it back to Harlan. Let someone else wear this. Someone who needs it to feel whole. I already know who I am. Harlan didn't argue. He simply nodded, his voice gruff with emotion. Then let me say this, the colonel said. There are warriors, and there are anchors. You've been both. Daniel offered a quiet smile. Then that's enough. Later that day, as father and daughter walked home under a sky breaking into soft sunlight, Bella looked up at him. Why didn't you take the medal? Daniel looked down at her, then at the sidewalk in front of them. Because some things aren't meant to be worn. They're meant to be lived. Bella frowned, thinking. Like love. Daniel smiled. Exactly like love. She walked in silence for a moment, then added, I would have taken it and put it in my backpack. He chuckled. I bet you would. Back at the diner that evening, the regulars gathered as always, Miss Connie at her booth, with the crossword, the factory retirees, arguing over jukebox selections, and Sheriff Brooks sipping his decaf, with one eye on the window. Nothing looked different, but the story had shifted. Somehow everyone knew. Maybe it was the way Daniel moved a little taller, a little lighter. Maybe it was the way Bella looked at him now, like she'd discovered a treasure buried in plain sight. Or maybe it was the framed photo on the wall. Tessa had quietly hung it earlier that day. It was black and white. Faded. A younger Daniel covered in soot, carrying a wounded soldier through smoke. The soldier's face barely visible. The photo had been captured by a journalist, embedded off-record, never published. Until now. Beneath it, a simple plaque read, For those who saved lives and chose silence. And next to it, taped with 2 strips of pink glitter tape, was Bella's drawing. Daniel didn't say a word when he saw it. He didn't need to. He simply placed his hand over his heart, breathed in the scent of coffee and cinnamon, and whispered to no one in particular. This is enough. That night, as he tucked Bella into bed, she reached up and touched the faint outline of the tattoo under his sleeve. Will I ever forget you saved people, she asked. Maybe Daniel said gently. But you'll never forget how I loved you. She nodded, sleep tugging at her eyes. That's even better than a medal. He sat beside her until her breathing slowed, steady and deep. The house was quiet. The world for once felt still. And in that stillness, Daniel finally understood what the fire had burned away and what it had left behind. Not a soldier, not a legend, not a name carved into stone, but a man, a father. And that was more than enough. The first time they walked through the door, they came with noise. The second time, they came with silence. It was a week after the quiet medal ceremony on a rainy Thursday morning when the three soldiers returned to Bray's diner. Tyler, the tall one with the square jaw and the eyes that had once brimmed with arrogance, led the way. Behind him were Grant, quieter now, and young Private Ellis, whose challenge coin had never left his jacket pocket since that day. Their uniforms were cleaner this time. Pressed. Neat. Not because of regulation, but out of respect. The bell above the door chimed softly as they entered. The diner was half full, the usual crowd sipping coffee and reading the paper. A few regulars glanced up, recognized the boys, and held their gaze a little longer than usual. Daniel stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee. He didn't speak. Bella, ever curious, peeked around the kitchen door and whispered, "They're back, Daddy." He nodded. "I see them." Tyler stepped forward, hat in hand. "We came to ask something." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "We want to help," Tyler said. "Not just say sorry this time. Do something. You told us last time that shame fades, but what comes next is what matters." Daniel looked at them, his gaze steady but not cold. "You're soldiers," he said. "You're used to orders, structure, mission briefings. What you're asking for requires humility, service, listening, and it comes with no recognition." "We're ready for that," Grant said. "We need it more than we thought." Private Ellis added, "We want to learn how to serve without being saluted." Daniel studied them for a long moment. Then quietly he reached under the counter and pulled out 3 aprons, faded, flour-stained, and humble as the man holding them. "Put these on," he said. "First lesson starts with wiping tables." The soldiers blinked. Ellis cleared his throat. "Sir, I thought we might start with wiping." "Tables," Daniel repeated, not unkindly. "Yes, sir." Bella giggled from behind the doorway. "They don't even know how to fold napkins." Daniel gave her a side glance. Neither did I. By noon, the trio had learned just how many ways a diner could humble you. Balancing plates, timing coffee refills, reading a guest's mood, listening without interrupting. They had also learned Daniel's golden rule. You don't just serve food, you serve presence. "Presence?" Tyler asked as they restocked syrup bottles. Daniel nodded. Sometimes a quiet coffee and a warm smile are the only things keeping someone going. Don't underestimate them. He didn't raise his voice once, but his authority wrapped the room like gravity. Tessa walked in mid-shift, surprised to see the trio in aprons. "Boot camp's moved to brunch, I see," she teased. Daniel cracked a faint smile. "They're getting field experience." Tyler flushed slightly but stood taller. "We're learning what real service feels like, Mom." Tessa looked at Daniel, then back at them, and simply said, "Then you're in the right place." After the rush, Daniel pulled the 3 aside. "I didn't bring you here to punish you," he said. "I brought you here to understand that service doesn't end with a discharge date. It begins when you choose who you want to be after." They nodded, breathless with the weight of realization. Grant asked quietly, "Why did you give us a second chance?" Daniel looked toward the corner booth, where Bella was doodling a picture of pancakes with capes on them. "Because someone gave me one." The days that followed became a quiet ritual. Each morning, the 3 soldiers arrived before sunrise. No jokes, no swagger, just sleeves rolled and hands ready. They learned the rhythm of the diner, the sacredness of routine, the importance of eye contact, the unspoken dignity in knowing someone's regular order without being told. They started remembering the names of the customers. They carried meals to a veteran who walked with a cane, helped Mrs. Ellison reach the top shelf of the sugar rack, and laughed when Bella promoted them to junior pancake officers. Daniel watched it all unfold, never once raising his voice. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the blinds, Tyler stood with Daniel behind the counter. I used to think strength was about being feared, he said. Now I think it's about being consistent. Daniel nodded. Consistency wins wars, he replied, and it saves people one quiet act at a time. Tyler looked at him. Do you ever miss it? The life before, Daniel thought for a long moment. Then he answered, sometimes. The structure, the purpose, but not the noise, not the pain. Here, I still have purpose. I just measure victories in smiles instead of confirmed kills. Tyler swallowed his voice, catching. Thank you for letting us in. You let yourselves in, Daniel said. That's the harder part. That Saturday, a surprise came through the door. Bella was setting the napkin holders just so when she looked up and gasped. A dozen men and women in biker jackets were stepping through the diner doors. Weathered faces, road-worn boots, quiet strength in every step. Among them, a man with a long silver braid stepped forward and removed his sunglasses. He walked up to Daniel and nodded once. We heard he said, that someone's teaching soldiers to listen again. Thought we'd ride through. Daniel blinked. Who told you someone who owes you a ride from Kandahar, the man said with a grin. You carried him out. He told us this diner's got better therapy than the VA. Daniel smiled quietly, deeply. The bikers filled the booths. Not rowdy, not loud, just present. Some saluted. Some nodded. Some said nothing at all. Tyler and the others served them without hesitation, refilling drinks, bringing extra napkins, clearing plates. No one needed to explain anything. There was a current running through the room, something deeper than words. Shared loss, shared grace. Bella stood near her father and whispered, Why are they all here? Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. Because sometimes, when you show people how to live quietly, the loud ones come to listen. Later that evening, after the bikers had rumbled away and the last light faded into stars, Tyler approached Daniel one last time. We're being reassigned next week, he said. Orders just came in. Daniel nodded. That's how it goes. Tyler hesitated, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something small. It was a folded paper, weathered and soft. He handed it to Daniel. Inside was a list handwritten. At the top, lessons from Bray's Diner. There were only 3 lines. 1. Lead quietly. 2. Serve with presence. 3. Leave people better than you found them. Daniel read it, folded it, then slipped it into his pocket. You wrote this, he asked. Tyler shook his head. We wrote it. All 3 of us. Daniel extended his hand. Tyler took it, firm, respectful. Thank you, sir, he said. Daniel corrected him. Just Daniel. Tyler smiled. Yes, sir. Daniel. The morning started like any other, at Bray's Diner. The windows fogged gently from the warmth inside, meeting the crisp fall air outside. A soft jazz tune played from the old jukebox, and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen. Miss Connie was already working on her crossword at booth 3. Earl and Joe, the factory retirees, argued half-heartedly about whether bacon should be crispy or chewy. It was the kind of day people forget, unless something extraordinary happens. And something extraordinary was about to. Daniel Bray stood behind the counter, wiping it down like he always did. His sleeves were rolled to the forearms, revealing the faint outline of the battlefield cross tattoo. A few new regulars truckers passing through had noticed it earlier that week and treated him with a quiet deference they didn't quite understand. Bella skipped around the floor, barefoot, despite the morning chill, with a stack of handmade signs. She'd decided today was Gratitude Day at the diner. Each sign read in her careful, oversized handwriting, "Thank you for being kind." Daniel didn't argue. If Bella declared a holiday, the diner observed it. Put one on the pie case, too, he reminded her. People need to feel thanked even when they're choosing cherry over apple. She giggled. What about banana cream? That's automatic forgiveness, he said with a wink. The bell above the door chimed, and a hush fell over the diner. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from shock or fear, but reverence. Standing in the doorway was Tessa Donovan, but not as they'd seen her before. Not in uniform. Not in civilian clothes. Today she wore a simple cream blouse, navy slacks, and held in her hands a framed photograph wrapped in cloth. Her eyes met Daniel's. And Daniel, who had walked through fire, saved lives, and buried names he could never speak, felt something shift in the air. She walked slowly to the front to the wall where old photos of veterans and their families hung. "This belongs here," she said, quietly. Daniel looked at the frame. Inside was a photo, old but powerful. A young Daniel Bray, barely 30, soot on his face, sleeves burned to the elbow, carrying Tessa in his arms, away from the flaming wreckage of a transport convoy. Her uniform was torn, his face unreadable. In the background, fire danced against the black desert night. It was the photo no one knew existed. A military photographer had snapped it in the chaos before the second blast. It had never been released. Until now. Beneath the image engraved in brass, some names are never spoken, but their legacy never stops speaking. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Tessa placed the frame on the wall right under the wooden sign that read, "Bray's Diner, Este 2015. She stepped back, then stood at attention, and saluted. The entire diner froze. Even Bella, still holding her stack of signs, stood still. Tessa held the salute for 5 full seconds, her hand unwavering, her eyes misted, with something, not quite sadness, but something deeper. Something like release. Daniel didn't move at first. Then slowly he stood straighter. Not as a cook, not as a man wiping tables, but as the soldier he once was and still quietly remained. He returned the salute. There was no need for words, because in that moment, everyone in the room understood. Later that day, when the morning rush ended and the diner emptied out again, Daniel found himself alone near the window sipping coffee. Bella had fallen asleep in the booth, curled around her sketch pad. Tessa sat across from him, jacket off her hair pulled back. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then she broke the silence. "You know why I really hung that picture?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Because someday," she said, "when Bella's older, she'll bring someone here. A friend, a boyfriend, maybe her own child. And she'll point to that photo and say, 'That's my dad.'" Daniel looked down, his hand tightening around the mug. "She won't tell them about medals or units or code names," Tessa went on. "She'll say he served pancakes with a side of grace, that he taught forgiveness like it was a daily special, that he made grown men wipe down syrup off the counter until they learned how to apologize." Daniel chuckled. "I'll never live that one down." She smiled. "No, you'll live it forward." A long beat passed. Then she added, "You changed them. Those boys. You gave them something the army didn't." Daniel looked at her. "What's that redemption? Without punishment?" As the sun dipped low and dusk painted golden lines across the diner floor, a small crowd gathered outside. Bella opened the door and ran back in. Daddy Come See Daniel stepped out with Tessa at his side. On the sidewalk stood about 20 people, young and old. Veterans, locals, a few in biker jackets. Some of the young soldiers who had trained under him at the diner, and others he didn't recognize but somehow still knew. They had come with one purpose. Each held a single candle. At the center of the group, Tyler, the once cocky soldier, now months into active service overseas, stood in uniform, on leave face solemn. He approached Daniel and handed him a note. On it was written, "Tonight, we light these candles for those who walked through fire and never stopped shining." Tyler added, "We started this last week. Once a month, veterans from nearby towns come here. They don't say much, but they say they feel safer when they're close to this place. Daniel blinked slowly. They call it the diner watch. As the candles flickered in the growing dark, Bella leaned into her father's side. Is it okay, she whispered, if people think you're a hero? Now, Daniel looked down at her, eyes soft. If they do, it's only because they saw you first. Bella grinned and squeezed his hand. Tessa turned to him one last time. You started with nothing. No name, no medal, no applause. But look what grew around you. Daniel nodded, not with pride, but with peace. Inside, the framed photo still hung beneath the wooden sign. But next to it, someone had quietly taped a note in a child's handwriting. My daddy is brave because he stayed. And under that, a single word, written in red crayon, all capital letters, enough. Because for Daniel Bray, the father, the veteran, the servant, the teacher, he no longer needed to prove who he was. The world had already spoken. And this time, it stood and saluted. We'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Whether you're tuning in from a small town or a big city, your presence here means the world to us. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story, where every tale honors the quiet heroes among us and reminds us all that kindness never goes out of style. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care of yourself and each other.